The diplomatic vessel hung in space like a massive jewel, its hull reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed almost alive. Taewon Kim stood at the viewport, watching the distant space station rotate slowly against the backdrop of stars. He had been to many strange places during his 5 years as a cultural liaison, but this meeting felt different. The Altherians were not known for their warmth or flexibility. Ambassador Kim, she's ready for you now. The translator device made the Altherian guard's voice sound flat and emotionless, though Taewon suspected there was more going on beneath the surface. He followed the guard through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. Everything was larger than necessary, built for beings who stood nearly 7 feet tall. The walls displayed murals of great battles and legendary warriors, all rendered in the distinctive style of Altherian art, where every scale on every warrior's body was painted in perfect detail. The dining chamber was smaller than he expected, almost intimate. A single table sat in the center, already prepared with food from both their worlds, and standing beside it, her posture rigid with tension, was Velmara. Taewon had met her 3 days ago when he first arrived. She was his assigned liaison, responsible for guiding him through Altherian customs and protocol. She was professional, efficient, and clearly uncomfortable around him. He had assumed it was simple xenophobia, the natural wariness of someone dealing with an alien species. Now seeing her in the soft light of the dining chamber, he noticed details he had missed before. Her armor, unlike that of other Altherians he had seen, covered more of her body. Most Altherian warriors wore ceremonial armor that displayed their scale patterns proudly. The colors and arrangements considered marks of beauty and genetic superiority. Velmara's armor was beautiful but concealing, showing almost nothing of the scales beneath. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her voice carried that same tension he had noticed in their previous meetings. Taewon sat watching as she remained standing. In Altherian culture, the host sat last. It was one of many small customs he had memorized during his preparation for this mission. "I must apologize," Velmara began, still not sitting. "This dinner is not entirely what you were told it would be." Taewon felt a flicker of concern but kept his expression neutral. "Oh? You were told this would be a cultural exchange, a chance to share traditions and food." She paused, her clawed hands gripping the back of her chair. "That is partially true, but I have an additional purpose for requesting this meeting. I'm listening." Velmara finally sat, but her posture remained stiff. "Your people are known throughout the galaxy now. Known for many things. Your adaptability, your curiosity, your unusual ability to find common ground with species very different from your own. We try," Taewon said carefully, unsure where this was leading. "There is something else you are known for, something that is spoken about in academic circles and diplomatic channels." She met his eyes directly, and he saw something in her gaze that surprised him. It looked like fear. "Humans are said to have unusual standards for beauty and worth. You do not judge by the same measures as most species." Taewon thought about how to respond. It was true in a way. Humanity's history of global integration, of mixing cultures and genetics over thousands of years, had created a species with wildly diverse appearances, and equally diverse appreciation for that diversity. What one human found beautiful another might find ordinary, and neither was wrong. "I suppose that's accurate," he said. "We're pretty varied as a species, and we tend to appreciate that variety." Velmara looked down at her plate. "I need to know if this is truth or simply diplomatic propaganda. I need to know if a human, faced with something their own species would find repulsive, would truly stay and not turn away." The question hung in the air between them. Taewon felt the weight of it, the significance he did not fully understand yet. "Among my people," Velmara continued, her voice dropping lower, "armor is not merely protection or ceremony. It is identity. It is worth. What we wear displays what we are beneath. Our scale patterns are evaluated from birth. They determine our potential mates, our social standing, our value to society." She stood abruptly, and Taewon heard the soft click of latches being released. "The question I must ask you, Taewon Kim of Earth, is this. Will you stay if I disrobe? Will you remain in this room, sharing this meal, if I show you what my own people turn away from?" Taewon's mind raced. This was clearly more than a simple cultural exchange. This was something deeply personal, perhaps even dangerous for her. He could refuse, keep things professional and distant. It would be safer for both of them. but he had seen something in her eyes. A desperate need to know, not for curiosity's sake, but for something more fundamental. A need to know if what she had heard about humans was real or just another disappointment. "Before you decide," Velmara said quickly, "you should understand. In all my years, I have never done this before someone not of my own family. It is not done, but I have been deemed flawed by my people. My scale patterns are irregular, asymmetric, colored in ways that violate our aesthetic standards. I am an accomplished warrior. I have won battles and earned commendations. But none of it matters because when Altherians look at me, they see only ugliness." She paused, her hands on the clasps of her armor. "So I ask you, human, will you stay?" Tae-Wan stood slowly. He saw her flinch slightly, perhaps expecting him to leave. Instead, he reached up and began unbuttoning his jacket. Velmara watched, confused, as he removed it and laid it carefully on his chair. He wore a simple shirt beneath, short-sleeved, despite the formal nature of the dinner. He turned his left arm so she could see the inside of his forearm clearly. The burn scars ran from his wrist to his elbow, twisted patterns where skin had melted and healed imperfectly. There were more scars on his other arm and still more hidden under his shirt. "Combat medic," he said simply. 5 years ago, shipfire. I got 32 people out before the blast doors sealed, but the heat got to me first." He sat back down, the scars fully visible. "I usually keep these covered during diplomatic functions. They make people uncomfortable. They ask questions I don't want to answer. They look at them and see damage." He met Velmara's eyes directly. "We all carry marks that others don't understand. We all have things we hide because we're afraid of how others will react. I'm staying, Velmara. Whatever you need to show me, whatever you need to share, I'm staying." For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then slowly, deliberately, she began to remove her armor. Each piece came away to reveal the scales beneath. And Tae-Wan saw what she meant immediately. Altherian scales, from what he had seen, typically followed symmetrical patterns. Colors flowed in predictable arrangements, creating designs that were indeed beautiful in their regularity. Velmara's scales broke every rule he had observed. They swirled in asymmetric patterns, colors shifting unpredictably. Where other Altherians showed geometric precision, she showed organic chaos, and Tae-Wan thought they were magnificent. They reminded him of Earth's natural patterns, of butterfly wings and opal stones, of things that were beautiful precisely because they refused to conform to simple rules. "You're staying," Velmara said softly, and he heard wonder in her voice. "I'm staying," Tae-Wan confirmed, and reached for his glass to offer a toast, to things that others don't understand, and to finding someone who does. Velmara picked up her own glass with a hand that trembled slightly. "To understanding," she echoed, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. News traveled fast in the close quarters of a diplomatic mission. By the time Tae-Wan returned to the human quarters aboard the research vessel New Dawn, 3 of his colleagues were waiting for him with expressions ranging from curious to concerned. "Is it true?" asked Hannah Park, the team's lead xenobiologist. She was younger than Tae-Wan, brilliant and utterly without patience for diplomatic dancing. "Did you really have a private dinner with Velmara where she removed her armor?" Tae-Wan set down his tablet and sighed. "Who told you?" "Does it matter? The Altherian delegation is apparently in an uproar. Commander Korthas has called 3 emergency meetings in the last 4 hours." Hannah crossed her arms. "So? Is it true?" "Yes, we had dinner. She shared something personal with me. That's all." "That's all?" Hannah looked incredulous. "Tae-Wan, do you understand what that means in their culture? An Altherian warrior removing armor in front of an outsider? It's like walking naked through a public square and asking someone to judge your worth based on what they see. It's vulnerability turned into a weapon." "It wasn't a weapon," Tae-Wan said quietly. "It was a question. She needed to know if what she had heard about humans was true." "And what did you tell her?" "I showed her my scars and I stayed." "That's all?" Tae-Wan picked up his tablet again. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for tomorrow's session." But Hannah did not move. She studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You like her. Not romantically, I don't mean that. But you saw something in her that matters to you." Tae-Wan thought about denying it, then realized there was no point. Hannah would see through it anyway. She's a warrior who's been told her entire life that she's worthless because of how she looks. Despite that, she's achieved things that would make her a hero in any other context. "Yes, I admire that." "Is that a problem?" It's a problem if it interferes with the mission. The mission is to build bridges between our species. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what I'm doing. Hana left, but Taewon could tell she was not convinced. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the dinner. To Velmara's scales, so different from what her people expected. To the way she had smiled when he stayed. Across the void of space in the Altherian flagship, Velmara was facing her own confrontation. Commander Kortha stood before her, his massive frame radiating disapproval. His armor was magnificent, displaying scale patterns that were textbook perfect. Every color in exactly the right place, every arrangement symmetrical and pure. He was what every Altherian warrior aspired to be. "Explain yourself," he said, his voice cold. Velmara stood at attention. "Sir, I engaged in a cultural exchange with the human liaison as assigned. You removed your armor before an alien." "Before a human." Korthas moved closer. "Do you understand what you have done? You have exposed our people's internal matters to outsiders. You have shown weakness. I showed honesty, sir." "Honesty?" Korthas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You showed that you are so desperate for validation that you will seek it from aliens who know nothing of our ways. You have brought shame to your division and to yourself." Velmara felt anger rising in her chest but forced it down. The human did not react with disgust or dismissal. He understood. He shared his own marks with me, scars from battle that he usually hides. We connected through shared experience. Scars from battle are honorable. Genetic flaws are not. Korthas turned away from her. "I am recommending you be removed from liaison duties. You are clearly not suitable for representing our people to the humans. Sir, with respect, the human delegates specifically requested to continue working with me. They found our exchange to be valuable." "Of course they did. Humans collect broken things. They pride themselves on their acceptance of the defective and weak. It is a fundamental flaw in their species." Korthas looked back at her. "You are dismissed. Report to standard duties tomorrow." Velmara left the commander's office feeling hollow. She had expected consequences, but part of her had hoped that maybe things would be different, that maybe showing honesty would be seen as strength, not weakness. She was walking through the corridor when she encountered 3 younger Altherian warriors. They stopped when they saw her, and she braced for mockery or disgust. But instead, one of them stepped forward. "Is it true?" the young warrior asked. "You removed your armor before the human and he stayed?" Velmara hesitated. "Yes, it's true." "What did he say?" "About your patterns?" "He said we all carry marks that others don't understand. He showed me his own scars and told me he was staying regardless of what I showed him." The 3 warriors exchanged glances. The one who had spoken stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I have a cousin. His patterns are asymmetric. He's brilliant, strong, a better fighter than most in his unit. But he's been denied advancement because of how he looks. When he heard what you did, what the human said, he cried." It was the first time anyone had suggested he might have value despite his appearance. The warrior looked directly at Velmara. "I know Commander Korthas is angry with you. I know the traditionalists think you've brought shame to our people. But some of us, the younger ones especially, we're starting to wonder if maybe the shame isn't in showing honesty. Maybe it's in hiding it." Before Velmara could respond, the warriors moved on, leaving her standing alone in the corridor with thoughts spinning through her mind. Back on the new dawn, Hana Park was not sleeping. Instead, she was deep in genetic data, comparing Altherian DNA samples that had been shared for medical research purposes. She had been studying them for weeks, looking for patterns that might help humans understand their new allies better. What she found made her sit up straight in her chair. The genetic markers associated with irregular scale patterns, the so-called flaws that Altherian society rejected, were not random mutations. They were variations that appeared naturally in about 15% of the population. And when Hana ran the markers through her analysis programs, something remarkable emerged. The irregular patterns correlated with stronger immune responses, with greater cognitive flexibility, with improved adaptation to environmental changes. The Altherians had been selecting against the very genetic diversity that would ensure their long-term survival. "Oh no," Hana whispered to herself. "They've been killing themselves slowly for generations." She pulled up population data. Fertility rates among Altherians had been declining for 2 centuries. Disease resistance was dropping. The species was becoming more fragile with each generation, and they had blamed it on everything except the obvious answer: They were eliminating genetic diversity in favor of aesthetic uniformity. Hana grabbed her tablet and headed for Taewan's quarters. He needed to see this. But more importantly, Velmara needed to see this. When she arrived, Taewan was still awake, reviewing notes. He looked up, surprised to see her. "I was wrong," Hana said without preamble. "What you did tonight, it wasn't just building a bridge. It might be the thing that saves their entire species." She showed him the data, explaining what she had found. Taewan's eyes widened as he understood the implications. "They're selecting themselves into extinction," he said slowly. "Yes. And the people they reject, people like Velmara, are the ones carrying the genetic keys to their survival." Hana sat down heavily. "But how do you tell a species that their entire cultural foundation, their concept of beauty and worth, is literally killing them?" Taewan thought about Velmara's face when he had stayed, about the 3 young warriors who had questioned her in the corridor, seeking hope that things could be different. "Carefully," he said. "Very carefully. And we start with the people who are already asking questions." He looked at the data again, seeing not just numbers but faces. Velmara's face. The faces of countless Altherians who had been told they were worthless because of patterns on their scales. "We need to talk to Velmara," he said. "She needs to know this. She needs to know that her people have been wrong about what makes someone valuable." Korthus removed her from liaison duties. "She's been reassigned. Then we request her specifically. We make it clear that we want to work with her, not someone else." Taewan stood up. "If the Altherians want this treaty, they'll accommodate us." Hana smiled slightly, using diplomatic leverage to force them to keep talking to the one person who might actually change their minds. "Risky." "Everything worth doing is risky," Taewan said. "Besides, she took a risk tonight, showing me her truth even though she was terrified. The least I can do is fight to make sure that truth means something." The diplomatic convoy moved through deep space at sublight speed, 3 vessels traveling in formation toward the neutral meeting zone. The New Dawn, flanked by 2 Altherian warships, made for an impressive sight, a symbol of cooperation between species. But symbols, Taewan was learning, could be fragile things. He sat in the observation deck watching the stars slide past when Velmara found him. She had been reinstated as liaison after the human delegation formally requested her continued presence. Korthus had agreed with obvious reluctance, but protocol demanded accommodation of diplomatic preferences. "You asked for me specifically," Velmara said, sitting in the chair beside him. She wore her armor again, but something had changed. She held herself differently now, less apologetic about her presence. "We did. You're good at your job, and we felt comfortable working with you." Taewan glanced at her. "Was there blowback?" "Some, but also support from places I did not expect. Young warriors, mostly. They've been asking questions about human culture, about how you determine worth and status." She paused. "You've made some of us think about things we accepted without question our whole lives." Before Taewan could respond, alarms shrieked through the ship. Red emergency lights flooded the observation deck. Velmara was on her feet instantly, her warrior training taking over. "Stay here," she commanded, already moving toward the door. "Not a chance," Taewan said, following her. His combat medic instincts were screaming that people would need help, and soon. They reached the main corridor to find chaos. Altherian guards were engaged in combat with other Altherians, the clash of their weapons echoing off the metal walls. Taewan saw human security personnel taking defensive positions, clearly confused about who was enemy and who was ally. "Traitors," one of the attacking Altherians roared. "You corrupt our people with alien weakness." Velmara moved like liquid lightning. She intercepted an attacker who was charging toward a group of human diplomats, her armored forearm blocking a blade strike that would have been fatal. She twisted, using the attacker's momentum against them, and sent them crashing into a bulkhead. "Pure scale movement," she said to Taewan, breathing hard. "Extremists. They think human influence is destroying traditional values." 2 more attackers came at them. Taewan saw Velmara calculate angles and distance in the fraction of a second before she moved. She was not the largest Altherian, but she fought with devastating efficiency. Every movement had purpose, no wasted energy, no dramatic flourishes. Just pure, practical combat designed to neutralize threats as quickly as possible. One attacker went down with a collapsed knee. The other found themselves disarmed and pinned against the wall, Velmara's forearm across their throat. "Stand down," she commanded. You will not harm these people. Flawed one, the attacker spat. You betray your own kind for aliens who see you as a curiosity. They will never truly accept you. Taewon stepped forward. You're wrong. We see her as exactly what she is, a skilled warrior and a person of integrity. That's more than I can say for people who attack unarmed diplomats. The sound of weapons fire made them all turn. At the far end of the corridor, an Altherian guard had been shot. Taewon did not think. He ran toward the fallen guard, his medical training overriding any sense of self-preservation. Taewon, no, Velmara shouted, but he was already sliding to his knees beside the wounded guard. The injury was bad. The energy weapon had burned through armor and scales, leaving a wound that was bleeding profusely. Taewon's hands moved automatically, applying pressure, assessing damage. He had seconds to act before blood loss became critical. Medical kit, he shouted to anyone listening. Now! A human crew member appeared with supplies. Taewon worked fast using emergency coagulants and synthetic tissue patches. He had treated wounds like this before, though never on an Altherian. But anatomy was anatomy, and the principles of trauma care translated across species. Around him, the fighting was ending. Ship security had regained control, and the attackers were being subdued. But Taewon barely noticed. His entire focus was on keeping this guard alive. You're going to be okay, he said, though he was not sure if the guard could understand him. Just stay with me. Stay conscious. Velmara appeared beside him, her armor scorched from battle. She looked at the guard, then at Taewon's bloody hands, and something shifted in her expression. You saved him, she said softly. You ran into danger to save an Altherian you don't even know. It's what we do, Taewon said, still focused on his patient. Humans. We're kind of stupidly protective of people once we decide they matter. Commander Korthus arrived with a security team. He surveyed the scene, taking in the subdued attackers, the damaged corridor, and Taewon kneeling in a pool of blood beside one of his guards. Report, he commanded. Velmara straightened to attention. Pure-scale movement operatives infiltrated the convoy. They attempted to assassinate Ambassador Kim and myself. We neutralized the threat with assistance from human security. Korthus looked at the wounded guard, then at Taewon. You treated him? Someone needed to. He was bleeding out. Taewon finally looked up, meeting the commander's eyes. He's stable now, but he needs proper medical attention immediately. Korthus gestured, and a medical team rushed forward to take over. They looked at the field treatment Taewon had performed, their expressions showing surprise and something that might have been respect. As the guard was carried away, Korthus turned to Velmara. Your combat performance was exceptional. You defeated 3 attackers while protecting multiple humans. I did my duty, sir. You did more than that. Korthus looked at the corridor, at the evidence of the brief, brutal combat. The pure-scale movement has been growing in influence. They see cultural exchange with humans as a threat to Altherian identity. This attack will not be the last. A new voice joined the conversation. Then perhaps we should understand why they feel threatened. Everyone turned to see Ambassador Lick stepping carefully over debris. The Quen were crystalline beings, their bodies reflecting light in rainbow patterns. Lix had been the neutral observer for these talks, representing the interests of the wider galactic community. Ambassador Lix, Korthus said, his tone respectful. The Quen were one of the older species in known space, and their perspective was valued. You were not harmed? I was not their target. They wanted to kill the human and Velmara specifically. Lix's voice had a musical quality like chimes in the wind. They see these two as symbols of cultural contamination, which suggests they understand perhaps better than you do, Commander, how significant their connection actually is. Their connection? Korthus frowned. A human shows acceptance to an Altherian that her own people rejected. Word spreads. Young Altherians begin questioning the cultural standards that deemed her worthless despite her capabilities. Extremists panic because they see their rigid worldview beginning to crack. Lix moved closer to Velmara. Change begins with individual moments of courage and recognition. Your dinner together was such a moment. Hannah Park appeared at the corridor entrance, her face pale but determined. Commander, I need to share something with you. Information about Altherian genetics that you need to see. This is not the time, Korthus began. It's exactly the time, Hannah interrupted, showing a boldness that made Taewon proud. Because what I've discovered explains why the pure-scale movement is so desperate. They can feel their culture dying, but they blame the wrong causes. She pulled up data on a portable display. The Altherians with irregular scale patterns, the ones your culture rejects, carry genetic markers for enhanced immune response, cognitive flexibility, and environmental adaptation. You're not rejecting flawed individuals. You're rejecting the genetic diversity that your species needs to survive. Korthos stared at the data. That's impossible. It's documented fact. Your fertility rates have declined for 2 centuries. Disease resistance is dropping. You're experiencing genetic stagnation because your mate selection criteria eliminate diversity in favor of aesthetic uniformity. Hana's voice was firm. In trying to create perfect Altherians, you're slowly making your species extinct. The silence that followed was heavy. Taewon watched Korthos process the information, saw the moment when intellectual understanding began to compete with cultural programming. If this is true, the commander said slowly, then everything we believe about genetic worth is inverted. The flawed would be valuable and the perfect would be less genetically diverse, Hana finished. Not worthless but not superior either. Just different variations of the same species, all necessary for long-term survival. Velmara spoke quietly. That's what the extremists fear. Not that humans will destroy our culture, but that they'll expose truths we've been hiding from ourselves. Korthos looked at her. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time. You believe this data? I believe my own experience, sir. I am a capable warrior. My irregular patterns have not prevented me from serving effectively, but I've spent my entire life being told I'm worthless because of how I look. She straightened. If there's even a chance that this data is correct, don't we owe it to our people to investigate? Or do we let fear of being wrong destroy everything our ancestors built? Taewon stood, wiping blood from his hands. You don't have to change everything overnight. Just ask the questions. Just be willing to look at evidence without letting. The Altherian homeworld was beautiful in a harsh way. Red stone mountains rose against a purple sky, and the capital city carved into the canyon walls looked like something from an ancient Earth legend. Taewon stood at the window of the diplomatic quarters, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. The genetic data had spread through Altherian society like fire. Some received it with hope. Others rejected it with fury. The pure-scale movement had attempted 2 more attacks, both foiled by increased security. But violence was not the only resistance. Traditional families were pressuring the High Council to reject the findings, calling them human manipulation designed to weaken Altherian culture. They're afraid, Velmara said from behind him. She had taken to visiting the human quarters regularly, though it still caused whispers among her own people, not of the data being false, but of it being true. Taewon turned to face her. What will you do? I'm going to invoke Talkesh, trial by combat to challenge cultural law. She said it calmly, but Taewon heard the tension underneath. It's an ancient rite rarely used. If I defeat 3 champions chosen by the High Council, they must formally hear my petition for reform. And if you lose? Then I'll likely be dead and the matter will be settled. She smiled slightly. But at least I'll have tried. Taewon felt cold fear in his stomach. Velmara, they'll choose the best warriors in your entire species to fight you. This is suicide, probably, but someone needs to do it. Someone needs to stand up and say that our culture is wrong, that we've been measuring worth by the wrong standards. She met his eyes. You showed me it was possible to be seen differently. You gave me hope that change could happen. I need to try to make that hope real for others. There has to be another way. If there is, we haven't found it. The High Council responds to strength and combat prowess. Words and data aren't enough. I need to prove that a flawed Altherian can stand against the best warriors our people can produce. She paused. I'm going to ask you to be my second. It's a symbolic role during Talkesh. You can't fight for me, but you stand with me. You represent my support. Velmara, if I do that, I tie humanity's reputation to your success or failure. My superiors will never approve. I know. That's why I'm asking you, not your superiors. She looked at him steadily. You stayed when I was vulnerable. I'm asking you to stay again. Taewon thought about all the practical reasons to refuse. The diplomatic complications. The political fallout if she lost. The danger of being associated with what many Altherians saw as cultural rebellion. Then he thought about Velmara removing her armor. Terrified, but brave. He thought about the young warriors who had started asking questions because of her courage. I'll need to tell my people. And they're going to be very unhappy with me. Velmara smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. I've learned that doing the right thing usually makes someone unhappy. The question is whether you can live with their unhappiness or your own cowardice. She was right, of course. Tae-wan returned to the New Dawn and informed his superiors. The conversation went exactly as badly as he expected. Absolutely not, the mission director said through the video link. You will not involve humanity in an internal Altherian cultural conflict. That's an order. With respect, sir, we're already involved. Our genetic data started this. Our cultural values gave Velmara the courage to challenge her society. Refusing to stand with her now would be abandonment. It would be diplomatic prudence. It would be betrayal. And every Altherian who's been watching this will see it that way. The young ones who started questioning their culture because they saw a human accept what their own people rejected. They'll learn that human acceptance is conditional and political. Tae-wan leaned toward the camera. We can either be the species that actually means what we say about diversity and worth, or we can be hypocrites. There's no middle ground here. The conversation ended without resolution, which meant Tae-wan had been neither forbidden nor approved. He chose to interpret that as permission. The day of Talkesh arrived with ceremony and spectacle. The grand arena, carved into solid rock, held thousands of Altherians. Every seat was filled. Screens broadcast the event across their entire world. This was not just combat. It was theater, ritual, and political statement all woven together. Velmara stood at the center of the arena floor, her armor polished but deliberately showing her scale patterns clearly. No more hiding. If she was going to challenge the culture's definitions of worth, she would do it openly. Tae-wan stood behind her, the only human on the arena floor. He wore formal diplomatic attire, looking small and fragile next to the Altherian warriors. He could feel thousands of eyes on him, judging, analyzing, wondering why a human would stand with a flawed warrior. The first champion entered, massive, heavily armored, moving with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. The crowd roared approval. That's Kral, Velmara said quietly. Undefeated in 73 combats. He's not just strong, he's smart. The fight began with explosive speed. Kral attacked with overwhelming force, trying to end things quickly, but Velmara moved like water, flowing around his strikes, never meeting force with force. She let him tire himself, let his confidence turn to frustration. When she struck, it was precise and devastating. A hit to his knee that made him stumble, a follow-up to his arm that made him drop his weapon. She could have injured him badly, even killed him. Instead, she disarmed him and stepped back, offering him honorable surrender. Kral looked at her with something like wonder, then nodded and left the arena. The crowd was silent, unsure how to react. The second champion was faster, smaller, using speed and technique rather than raw power. The fight was beautiful and terrible, two skilled warriors testing each other's limits. Velmara took hits that would have disabled a lesser fighter, but she kept moving, kept adapting, and eventually found the opening she needed. Victory again, and this time Velmara was bleeding from several wounds. Tae-wan wanted to go to her, but the rules of Talkesh forbade it. She had to face all three champions without aid. One more, she said to him, breathing hard. Just one more. The third champion entered, and the crowd's reaction told Tae-wan everything he needed to know. This was someone special. Commander Korthas, Velmara said, and for the first time Tae-wan heard fear in her voice. The commander looked at her across the arena floor. His armor displayed his perfect scale patterns, the genetic ideal that Altherian culture worshipped. He was everything she was told she could never be. I take no pleasure in this, Korthas said, his voice carrying across the arena. You are a skilled warrior, Velmara, but you challenge the foundations of our society. I cannot allow that to succeed. I challenge the lies we tell ourselves, Velmara replied. There's a difference. Before the fight began, Tae-wan called out to her. Velmara, remember Kintsugi? She looked back at him, confused. He held up his scarred arm. The Japanese art of fixing broken pottery with gold. The breaks don't make it less beautiful. They make it more beautiful because it's survived, because it's been repaired, because it shows history and resilience. He met her eyes. Your irregular patterns aren't defects to overcome. They're what make you extraordinary. Velmara stood straighter. She looked at Korthas and then at her own scales, the patterns that had been used to define her as lesser her entire life. Thank you, she said to Tae-wan, for helping me see myself differently. The fight began, and it was unlike the others. Korthos was not just skilled. He was legendary, every move perfect, every strategy flawless. He had trained his entire life to be the ideal Altherian warrior, but Velmara had trained her entire life while being told she was worthless. She had learned to fight harder, think faster, push further because she could never rely on cultural approval or social status. Every victory she had earned had been despite her society, not because of it. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Both warriors were bleeding now, both showing signs of exhaustion. Korthos had expected to win through superior technique and training, but Velmara matched him strike for strike, adapting to his style, finding weaknesses he did not know he had. She saw her opening. A tendency he had to favor his right side, a tiny gap in his defense when he transitioned between attack patterns. She struck fast and precise. Korthos went down. The arena fell absolutely silent. The impossible had just happened. The flawed warrior had defeated the perfect commander. Velmara stood over him, weapon ready to deliver the final strike if needed. But instead, she offered her hand to help him up. Korthos stared at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. As she helped him to his feet, he did something that shocked everyone watching. He began removing his armor, piece by piece revealing what was beneath. Taewon saw it immediately. Irregular patterns, carefully hidden under armor designed to conceal them. Korthos, the perfect warrior, the genetic ideal, was hiding the same traits that had made Velmara an outcast. "I have hidden this my entire life," Korthos said, his voice carrying across the now silent arena. "I have perpetuated the same lies that hurt me because I was afraid. Afraid that if anyone knew, everything I had achieved would be the High Council chamber was ancient stone and modern technology blended together." Screens displayed data while carved pillars told stories of Altherian history. Taewon sat in the observation section with other diplomats, watching as Velmara stood before the council to present her petition. 3 days had passed since the fight in the arena. 3 days of intense debate across Altherian society. The broadcast of Korthos revealing his hidden patterns had been watched by billions. Social networks were flooded with Altherians sharing their own stories, their own hidden traits, their own experiences of being deemed lesser. The traditionalists had organized counter-protests, arguing that accepting genetic variation would destroy the cultural identity that had sustained the Altherian people for millennia. The pure-scale movement had attempted another attack, this time on a gathering of young Altherians demanding reform. It was chaos, controlled only by the certainty that the High Council would have to make a decision. Velmara had won her Tulkesh. They were bound by ancient law to hear her petition. "State your case," the High Counselor said. She was old, her scales showing the dulling of age, but her eyes were sharp. Velmara stood straight despite her healing injuries. "I petition the High Council to reform mate selection practices to include all Altherians regardless of scale pattern irregularity. I petition for the recognition that combat achievement, intellectual contribution, and social value are not determined by genetic appearance." "You ask us to overturn centuries of tradition," another counselor said, "to declare that everything our ancestors believed about genetic worth was false. I ask you to examine evidence and adapt when evidence demands it. Isn't that what warriors do? We assess the battlefield and we change tactics when the situation requires." Velmara gestured to the screens around the chamber. "The humans brought us data showing that our culture's rejection of irregular patterns has been eliminating genetic diversity. We're experiencing declining fertility, reduced disease resistance, and genetic stagnation. Our traditions are killing us slowly." "The humans have their own agenda," a traditionalist counselor argued. "They want to weaken us by destroying our cultural cohesion." This time it was Hannah Park who stood to respond. As the lead scientist who had compiled the genetic data, she had been granted permission to address the council. "The data doesn't care about anyone's agenda," Hannah said firmly. "Genetic diversity improves species resilience. This is true for humans, for Altherians, for every biological species we've studied. Your culture's aesthetic preferences happen to work against your biological needs. That's not a moral judgment. It's just reality." She brought up displays showing genetic analyses. "Look at the data yourself. Altherians with irregular patterns carry markers for enhanced immune response, cognitive flexibility, and environmental adaptation. These aren't defects. They're advantages that your species needs. especially as you expand into different planetary environments. But our culture has thrived with these standards for thousands of years, another counselor protested. Your culture thrived when your population was larger and more diverse, Hana countered. As you've enforced stricter and stricter mate selection based on scale patterns, your genetic diversity has narrowed. The problems you're facing now, the declining fertility and disease resistance, those are relatively recent developments. They correlate directly with your cultural shift toward more rigid aesthetic standards. Commander Korthos stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and the chamber fell quiet. I have lived my entire life as a lie, he said. I hid my irregular patterns because I knew they would invalidate everything I achieved. I let warriors with true potential be rejected because I was too cowardly to challenge the system that protected me. He looked at Velmara. This warrior defeated me in fair combat. By our culture's own standards, that proves her worth. But more than that, she had the courage I lacked. She refused to hide. Commander, the High Counselor said carefully, you are suggesting that our greatest warrior is genetically flawed by our standards, and yet he has defended our people successfully for decades. Do you see the contradiction this creates? I see exactly what it creates. It proves our standards are wrong. Korthos moved to the center of the chamber. How many other warriors have we rejected? How many brilliant minds have we dismissed? How many potential leaders have we denied because we valued appearance over ability? You ask us to value ability over genetic purity, a traditionalist said. But genetic quality is what separates us from lesser species. Taewan had remained quiet, knowing that as a human, his voice might do more harm than good. But now he stood. May I speak? He asked. The High Counselor considered, then nodded. The human who stood with Velmara may address the council. Taewan stepped forward, very aware that he was a small, fragile-looking creature addressing beings who could easily tear him apart. Humans are what you might call genetically messy, he began. We're not perfect by anyone's standards. We're the result of thousands of years of mixing between different populations, different genetic lines, different appearances. We have enormous variation in how we look, how we think, how we process information. He pulled up images on the displays, showing the incredible diversity of human appearance. By Altherian standards, we should be weak. We should be fractured. We should have collapsed under our own chaos. He smiled slightly. Instead, we're adaptable. We thrive in environments from frozen tundra to scorching deserts. We've spread across our planet and beyond because our diversity gives us options. What works for one human might not work for another, but collectively we can handle almost anything. You suggest we become like humans? A counselor asked, the distaste evident. I suggest you become the best version of Altherians, and the best version includes all of you, not just the ones who fit narrow aesthetic criteria. Taewan looked at Velmara. When she removed her armor in front of me, she was terrified I would reject her. Her whole life she'd been told she was worthless because of how she looked. But I saw a warrior. I saw someone brave enough to be vulnerable. I saw worth that had nothing to do with scale patterns. He turned back to the council. You can cling to traditions that are slowly killing your species. Or you can adapt. Evolution doesn't care about your pride. It cares about survival. Right now your culture is fighting against your biology. That's a war you'll eventually lose. The chamber erupted in argument. Counselors shouted at each other, their careful decorum breaking down. Some demanded immediate reform. Others insisted on maintaining tradition. The High Counselor called for order repeatedly. Finally, she stood. Enough. This council will vote on Velmara's petition. But first, I have a question for Commander Korthos. The chamber quieted. Commander, if we maintain current standards, knowing what we now know about genetics and survival, what does that mean for our military strength in the long term? Korthos did not hesitate. It means we weaken ourselves. We reject warriors like Velmara who could strengthen our forces. We eliminate genetic advantages that could help us survive new environments and new threats. We choose aesthetic purity over strategic advantage. And if we reform, what happens to our cultural identity? To the traditions that have defined us? We evolve, Counselor. We keep what serves us and adapt what doesn't. Every warrior learns this. A fighting style that works in one situation fails in another. We adapt or we die. He gestured to the chamber around them. Our ancestors would be ashamed if we chose to cling to comfortable lies rather than face difficult truths. The High Counselor looked at Velmara. You have challenged us profoundly. You've forced us to question beliefs we held as fundamental truth. Whether we approve your petition or not, you have already changed our society. The questions have been asked. They cannot be unasked. I understand, Counselor. I only ask that you examine the evidence honestly and make your decision based on what's best for our people's survival, not what's most comfortable. Very well. This council will deliberate and vote. We will reconvene in 3 days. The session ended. As Altherians filed out arguing in clusters, Taewan made his way to Velmara. You did it, he said. You made them listen. We made them listen, she corrected. You stood with me. That mattered more than you know. Korthus approached them. Regardless of the council's decision, what you've started cannot be stopped. Young warriors are already questioning the old ways. Families with irregular members are speaking out. You've given them hope. Hope isn't enough, Velmara said. We need change. Hope is the beginning of change, Taewan said. Everything else follows from someone being brave enough to hope for something different. Hana joined them, looking exhausted but satisfied. The genetic data is being distributed across their science networks. Even if the council rejects the petition, the evidence is out there. Scientists will study it. Questions will multiply. 3 days, Velmara said, looking at the council chamber. 3 days until we learn if my people can adapt, or if they'll choose comfortable extinction over uncomfortable survival. Taewan touched her arm gently. Whatever happens, you've already proven that worth isn't determined by appearance. You've proven that courage and skill matter more than genetic aesthetics. The 3 days of waiting felt like 3 months. Taewan spent most of it in the diplomatic quarters, monitoring news feeds and social networks as Altherian society argued with itself. The debate had spread far beyond the council chambers. Every corner of their civilization seemed to have an opinion. Protests filled city squares. Some demanded reform. Others demanded the execution of Velmara for blasphemy against cultural traditions. Academic institutions released statements supporting the genetic data. Religious organizations claimed the data was fabricated or misinterpreted. It's tearing them apart, Hana said, watching footage of a particularly heated demonstration. We might have broken their society trying to save it. They were already broken, Taewan replied. We just made the cracks visible. Sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed properly. Velmara had been staying in the human quarters for her own safety. The pure-scale movement had put a price on her head, and even moderate traditionalists saw her as a dangerous radical. She spent her time preparing for the council session, knowing that what she said might determine her species' future. On the morning of the 3rd day, they received word. The High Council was ready to reconvene. The council chamber was even more crowded than before. Every available space held observers, diplomats, journalists broadcasting to billions. The tension was physical, pressing down on everyone present. The High Counselor called the session to order. 3 days ago, we heard arguments for fundamental reform of Altherian cultural practices regarding genetic worth and mate selection. We have deliberated. We have examined evidence. We have consulted with scientists, historians, military leaders, and cultural experts. She paused, and in that pause, Taewan could feel the entire Altherian civilization holding its breath. The genetic data presented by Dr. Park is scientifically sound. This has been confirmed by our own geneticists. The correlation between irregular scale patterns and enhanced biological advantages is real and significant. The decline in fertility and disease resistance in our population directly correlates with our increasingly rigid mate selection practices. A traditionalist counselor stood. With respect, High Counselor, the accuracy of the data does not automatically dictate our cultural response. We are more than our biology. Indeed, we are, Counselor Rantek, which is why we must also examine the cultural implications. The High Counselor gestured to the displays. Commander Korthus is our most decorated living warrior. By our culture's own measures of worth through combat achievement and service, he is among our most valuable members. Yet he has lived his entire life hiding irregular patterns that our culture declares worthless. She looked directly at the traditionalist counselor. Can you explain this contradiction? How can our greatest warrior be simultaneously our most valuable and genetically worthless? Counselor Rantek struggled to respond. The commander is exceptional despite his genetic irregularity, not because of it. The data suggests otherwise, another counselor interjected. The cognitive flexibility markers associated with irregular patterns may be exactly what made the commander such an effective strategic thinker. Hannah Park stood when recognized. May I present additional findings? Over the past 3 days, I've been working with Altherian scientists to analyze historical records. New data appeared on the displays. Population graphs, fertility rates, disease patterns all mapped across centuries. 2,000 years ago, Altherian population showed much greater genetic diversity. Scale patterns had huge variation. Cultural records from that era showed different aesthetic standards, ones that valued diversity rather than uniformity. Hannah highlighted sections of the graphs. Around 1,500 years ago, your culture shifted. A religious movement declared that perfect symmetry in scale patterns was a sign of divine favor. This belief became institutionalized, eventually becoming the foundation of your mate selection practices. She brought up fertility data. For the first few centuries, the impact was minimal. But as generations passed and the gene pool narrowed, problems began appearing. Slowly at first, then accelerating. The cultural shift toward aesthetic uniformity created a genetic bottleneck that's been tightening for 1,500 years. An elderly counselor who had been silent until now spoke up. Are you suggesting that a religious belief has been slowly killing our species? I'm suggesting that cultural practices, however well-intentioned, can have biological consequences that take generations to become visible. Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't about blame. It's about recognizing reality so you can adapt. Velmara rose to speak. Counselors, I'm not asking you to abandon Altherian culture. I'm not asking you to become human or adopt alien values. I'm asking you to reclaim older Altherian values, the ones our ancestors held before the cultural shift Dr. Park described. She pulled up historical images, artistic renderings from ancient Altherian civilization. Look at our own art from 2,000 years ago. The warriors depicted show huge variation in scale patterns. All are portrayed as heroes. All are shown as beautiful in their own way. We once knew how to value diversity. Somewhere along the path we forgot. You ask us to return to older ways? A counselor asked. I ask us to move forward by remembering truths we left behind. That worth comes from what we do, not how we appear. That survival requires adaptation. That strength includes flexibility. Velmara's voice grew stronger. I proved in the arena that an irregular warrior can match the best our culture offers. Commander Korth has proved that our greatest can carry the traits we claim are worthless. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether we have the courage to accept it. Counselor Rantek stood again. And if we accept this, where does it end? Do we abandon all standards? Accept all variations regardless of consequence? Taewan stood without being recognized and several counselors objected, but the High Counselor gestured for him to speak. On Earth, we have a concept called the golden mean, the balance between extremes. Taewan moved to the center of the chamber. You don't have to swing from rigid uniformity to complete chaos. You can find a middle path. Keep the cultural appreciation for beauty, but expand your definition. Keep the value on genetic health, but recognize that health includes diversity. He looked around the chamber at all the Altherian faces watching him. My species nearly destroyed itself several times throughout our history. Wars over differences in appearance, beliefs, cultures. We survived because we eventually learned that diversity wasn't a threat but a strength. Different perspectives let us solve problems in multiple ways. Different genetics let us adapt to different environments. We're not perfect. We still struggle with it. But we've learned that trying to enforce uniformity only weakens the whole. Humans are fundamentally different from Altherians, Counselor Rantek argued. What works for your species may not apply to ours. The genetics apply to all biological species, Hannah said. The cultural applications can vary, but the underlying principle remains. Genetic diversity improves survival odds. The High Counselor called for order as arguments broke out again. Counselors, we must vote. The evidence has been presented. The arguments have been made. Now we decide. The vote was not quick. Each counselor spoke, explaining their position. Some supported full reform. Others proposed gradual changes. A few insisted on maintaining tradition regardless of consequences. Taiwan watched Velmara's face as the votes accumulated. He saw hope and fear warring in her expression. This was her life's work, her entire identity as a warrior and individual, reduced to a count of raised hands. The High Counselor tallied the final vote. The chamber fell silent. By a margin of 7-5, this council accepts Velmara's petition for reform. The words echoed in the sudden quiet, effective immediately. Altherian cultural practices regarding mate selection will be revised. Scale pattern irregularity will no longer be considered a disqualifying genetic flaw. Combat achievement, intellectual contribution, and social value will be recognized as independent of aesthetic appearance. The chamber erupted. Cheers from some sections, angry shouts from others. The High Counselor called for order repeatedly. This reform will be implemented gradually, she continued once she could be heard. We will not force change upon those who wish to maintain traditional preferences in their personal mate selection. But we will no longer enforce cultural exclusion of irregular individuals. We will no longer teach our children that appearance determines worth. She looked at Velmara. You have won more than a legal victory today. You have challenged us to be better than we were, to face truths we found uncomfortable. Whether history judges this decision as wise or foolish, you will be remembered as the warrior who forced us to evolve. Velmara stood, and Taiwan could see tears on her face, though she tried to hide them. I only wanted my people to survive, Counselor. To have a future where all Altherians could contribute regardless of how they looked. You have given us that chance. Now we must prove worthy of it. As the session ended and Altherians flooded out arguing and celebrating and protesting, Corthus approached Velmara. You did what I could not. You spoke truth when I hid behind armor. You revealed yourself when it mattered most. Velmara Repul 6 months had passed since the High Council's vote. 6 months of turbulent, sometimes violent, but ultimately transformative change across Altherian society. Taiwan stood in the observation deck of the joint training facility, watching young Altherians and humans work together in combat exercises. The facility itself was a symbol of how far things had come. Built on neutral ground, it represented military cooperation between species, but also served as a testing ground for Altherian cultural reform. Warriors with irregular patterns trained alongside traditionally perfect ones, and performance metrics told an undeniable story. Ability mattered far more than appearance. They're getting better, Velmara said, joining him at the viewport. She wore modified armor now, a new design that displayed rather than hid her scale patterns. She had become something of a celebrity, though she seemed uncomfortable with the attention. The humans or the Altherians? Taiwan asked. Both. Together. She watched a mixed team execute a complex tactical maneuver. 3 months ago, they struggled to coordinate. Now they move like they've trained together for years. Shared purpose helps, Taiwan observed. When you're focused on the mission, differences become resources instead of obstacles. The changes across Altherian society had been profound, but uneven. Major cities had embraced reform relatively quickly, especially among younger generations. Rural areas and traditionalist enclaves resisted more strongly. The pure-scale movement had fractured, with some members accepting the new reality while others grew more extreme. There had been violence. 3 attempts on Velmara's life, all foiled. Attacks on families with irregular members, protests that turned into riots. But there had also been unexpected moments of grace. Traditional families publicly apologizing to relatives they had rejected. Warriors with perfect patterns speaking out in support of reform. Cultural leaders finding ways to honor tradition while accepting change. Counselor Rantek requested a meeting with you, Velmara said. He's one of the traditionalists who voted against reform. I remember. What does he want? He didn't say, but the fact that he's willing to meet at all is significant. Taiwan found Counselor Rantek in one of the facility's conference rooms. The elderly Altherian looked tired, older than he had 6 months ago. Ambassador Kim, thank you for meeting with me. Of course, Counselor. How can I help you? Rantek was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I voted against the reform. I believed, and part of me still believes, that abandoning our standards would mean losing our identity as a people. I understand that fear. It's not irrational, but I have been watching, observing what has happened since the Council's decision. Rantek pulled up data on a screen. Fertility rates have stopped declining. In some demographics, they're actually improving. Applications to military service from previously excluded individuals have increased by 40%. Scientific institutions report greater diversity of thought and innovation. He looked at Taiwan directly. The data suggests the reform is working. My culture is not dying. It's evolving, and I'm old enough to admit when I was wrong. That takes courage, counselor. Less courage than Velmara showed. Less courage than you showed when you stood with her despite political risks. Rantek paused. I want to understand. What made you stay when she asked? What did you see that we could not? Taewon thought carefully about his answer. I saw someone brave enough to be vulnerable. Someone who had been told her entire life that she was worthless but kept achieving anyway. I saw someone who needed to know if acceptance was possible, if worth could be measured by something other than appearance. But why did that matter to you? She was an alien, a stranger from a culture you barely understood. Because everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not just what they look like. Because rejecting someone for genetic traits they can't control is wasteful and cruel. Because I've been marked as lesser too, and I know what that does to a person. Taewon held up his scarred arm. When you're told you're damaged goods, you start to believe it. Having someone see past that, see the person underneath, that can change everything. Rantek studied the scars. Your people truly do not judge by appearance? We judge constantly.
We're not saints.
But we've learned slowly and painfully that judging people's worth by how they look is one of the stupidest things we can do. We miss talent, we waste potential, we hurt people for no reason. So we try, imperfectly, to value what people do and who they are instead of what they look like. I'm beginning to understand why the High Counselor called this a revelation rather than just a reform. You didn't just give us data, you gave us a different way of seeing. Velmara did that, not me. I just refused to walk away. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes staying when others expect you to leave is the most powerful thing you can do. Later that day, Taewon attended a ceremony at the training facility. A class of new warriors was graduating, the first mixed group to complete the reformed training program together. Among them were several Altherians with irregular patterns, including one young warrior who caught Taewon's attention. Her name was Dana. Her scale patterns were perhaps the most irregular Taewon had seen, colors swirling in ways that defied any pattern at all. She had scored highest in her class in combat tactics and strategic thinking. After the ceremony, Dana approached Velmara hesitantly. Commander, may I speak with you? Velmara had been given a military rank as part of the reform, recognizing her combat achievement and her role in cultural change. She turned to the young warrior with a gentle expression. Of course. What's on your mind? I wanted to thank you. Before the reform, I was told I would never be allowed to serve. My family apologized for my existence. I grew up believing I was a mistake. Dana's voice shook slightly. You changed that. You proved that people like us could be warriors, could have worth. You gave me a future I thought was impossible. Velmara was quiet for a moment. I only did what needed to be done. The courage was in you all along. You just needed someone to see it. Will you teach me? I want to learn from you specifically. Your fighting style, your approach, everything. Dana hesitated, then added quietly. I need to know if I'm truly worthy despite my patterns. If someone like me can really succeed. Velmara looked at the young warrior for a long moment. Then she began removing a piece of her arm armor, exposing her own irregular scales fully. The gesture was deliberate, symbolic. I'm staying, Velmara said, echoing words she had heard months ago. Are you? Dana's eyes widened as she understood the reference, the story that had spread across their entire civilization. The human who stayed, the question that changed everything. Yes, Commander, I'm staying. Then we begin tomorrow. Be ready to work harder than you've ever worked before. Velmara smiled. Being different means we have to prove ourselves twice over. It's not fair, but it's reality. So we become twice as good. Taewon watched the exchange, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what change looked like in practice. Not grand declarations or legal reforms, though those mattered. Real change happened in small moments like this, one person at a time, someone brave enough to ask for help and someone generous enough to give it. Hana Park appeared beside him, tablet in hand as always. Final genetic reports are in. Birth rate increases are confirmed across all demographics. Disease resistance markers are already showing improvement in the youngest generation. We were right. The reform is saving them. They're saving themselves, Taewon corrected. We just showed them the data. They made the choice. A choice that's still controversial. The Pure Scale movement attempted another bombing last week. Traditionalist families are filing legal challenges. Hana looked concerned. This isn't over. It might never be truly over. Change is never clean or simple, but it's happening. Look around. Taewon gestured to the training facility, to the mixed groups of humans and Altherians working together. 6 months ago, this would have been impossible. Now it's normal. That's progress. Commander Hearth joined them, his stride purposeful. The commander had become an unlikely advocate for reform, using his military prestige to argue for the changes. He had also taken a mate publicly, an Altherian scientist with irregular patterns, making his personal choices a political statement. Ambassador Kim, Dr. Park, I wanted to inform you that the High Council has approved the next phase of military integration. We'll be opening joint training programs on 5 additional worlds. He looked pleased. Your concepts of strategic diversity are proving effective. Units with mixed pattern types show enhanced problem-solving abilities. Makes sense, Hana said. Different genetic backgrounds mean different neural patterns, different approaches to the same problem. You get more creative solutions? Exactly what the data predicted. Hearth watched the training exercises below. I spent my entire career hiding what I was, trying to fit an impossible standard. Now I see young warriors training openly, celebrated for their differences rather than shamed. I wish I had your courage earlier, Velmara's courage. Perhaps we could have saved generations from the same pain. You're showing that courage now, Taewon said. That matters more than you think. Young warriors see the greatest living commander accepting reform, embracing it even.